Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to the Watch Box, and thanks for logging on. Well, we're back after the blizzard of Friday afternoon, and I'm here with Jason Mane, watch buyer for Watchbox in Golfburg. Hey, Jason.
How you doing?
This is the guy who always dresses sharp and brings blade to match. More on that in a moment. Remember, Jason buys and sells watches via our new website. Of course, those of you who remember us as Watch You Want down in Miami should know that we are now Watchbox up in Philadelphia. Our new website is as fast as you always told me it should be. It's as easy to navigate as you'd want it to be, and it makes it easier to find the watches you want most. So check out thewatchbox.com for our latest inventory, and it's the easiest way to sell your watch when the time comes to exchange for a new flame. Jason, wrist shots, what have we tonight?
It's something a little different today. We're starting on the pad instead of the wrist. I just wanted to highlight. So the 510, obviously I got the sub about a month ago. Kind of neglected the Panerai for a little bit while I was on my honeymoon with the non-date ceramic sub. So last week I put this new strap on this piece, and I've had it on my wrist for about 10 days. And it's always nice to put something back on and not really miss what you took off. So I'm really happy with this purchase.
Excellent stuff. Now, tell me a little bit about the strap for a second, because I know you swap straps a lot, and you've got probably a fortune invested in straps.
Well, yes and no. I do some trading. Got a couple friends that are really into Panerai as well, clients and friends. So sometimes we trade stuff, sometimes they send me stuff. This is the olive tan Al Sumente strap, and just these break in really, really well, very comfortable.
So it is a factory strap there?
Yeah, this is a factory Panerai strap. I'm not opposed to putting aftermarket straps on Panerais, but this one does happen to be a Panerai manufacturer strap.
Looks good.
Yeah.
And you've got the blades to match, as I said, so let our folks know your other passion. I will
say, quite a handsome-looking combo here, if I may. But kind of a similar color combination there you got. So this is canvas green G10 micarta, and then zirconium.
Now, let me ask you real quick. Who made the blade? Where'd you get it? And if our viewers wanted to get into something like that, what would that cost?
So this is a custom knife, custom maker, David Mosier, who actually I'm taking a delivery tomorrow for another piece of his. Super excited about that. This is about a 2.5-year wait list if you get on his books, although I don't believe he has books right now. And this will run you about $3 grand or so.
Very cool stuff. Okay, we've got friends signing in from all over the world. I see Alexi from Finland. I see Nocturnal Mind from Denmark. I see Adam J. Odell coming from, did I read that right? South Bend, Indiana. Was that once the home of Studebaker and Packard? Also see friends joining us from the likes of Germany and Australia, so friends near and far. If you're waking up early, if you're staying up late, I thank you doubly for that. All right, so let's go into this or that, where I give Jason a choice between two watches, and he tells me from a collector's perspective which one he would prefer to have. He kind of gave me a coming attraction on this one, so I think I know what he's going to say. But this or that, big, bold, and blue from independent manufacturers. The MB&F HM7 Aquapod, probably the best in show at SIHH 2017, and that was by my informal straw poll of the journalists there, versus the HYT H1 Air RC44. Okay, let's go with the first one. This is a no comparison, possibly based on a price gap of $20,000. But guys, show me the HYT H1 RC44 Air, a watch that came out in 2015. This is 49 millimeters in blue aluminum. It's a watch that was designed to celebrate the RC44 Regatta series created by Russell Coutts. The series, not the watch. Titanium and rubber trim on the aluminum. It features a full canvas strap with a deployant clasp, smoked sapphire dial featuring the hour numerals covering the bellows system as well as the power reserve. Full fluid scale, which is both a regulator, hour indicator, and a retrograde. It bounces back all the way around the dial when it hits 12 hours. It also features a carbon fiber minutes dial with a luminescent hand. Although the hour scale is not luminescent, you can read the minutes at night. A little bit weird, but assuming you know the hour, you can guesstimate your time. And this is one of 3 special series HYT watches designed for the RC44 series. It features The HYT manufacturer caliber 101, manually wound. It has a 65-hour power reserve, a power reserve scale. It's both a retrograde and a regulator, and it's important to remember that it features a hydromechanical system where the beating balance takes the bellows reservoirs, one containing a clear fluid, one containing a yellow fluid, and it pushes them back and forth across the dial of the watch. That's right, what appears to be an empty part of that sapphire ring around the dial is actually full of a clear liquid that pushes and pulls the other one. Finally, you have fluid-filled retrograde hours inside a sapphire tube that, according to the HYT folks at SIHH last year, is actually made in the United States. So 2015 special series of 22 pieces, 75,000 US dollars, and 100 meters water resistant, in keeping with the nautical theme of the edition. Jason, the alternative. This year's sensation in titanium, it is the MB&F HM7 Aquapod. It's big, it's bold, it's blue like the others, but it's a little bit airier with more space between its components. Nevertheless, it spans 53.8 millimeters across its immense titanium and ceramic blue rotating dive-style bezel. Now, what sets this one apart is the fact that it is huge, but it's light on the wrist. It features articulated lugs, so that even though the case and the bezel are huge, the actual footprint on the wrist is much smaller. It also features two sapphire domes, one on the top, one on the bottom, one covering a spectacular array of lume. I have to say, this might be the most impressive lume shot of any watch released in 2017. No, not that one. It's the HYT Ultra material that you remember from the HM10 Black Badger collaboration. The nighttime luminescence that glows almost like a second sun. Absolutely spectacular for the scrolling hours and minutes. If we've got that graphics, guys, definitely pull it up. Also separately, it has a flying tourbillon with scrolling hours and minutes in little wheels that move around the dial, and a jellyfish-like caseback. That's the flying tourbillon on the HM7 caliber, and a jellyfish-like caseback featuring a platinum winding mass. Okay, not a diver, but according to MB&F and the HM7 representative Charis at the event, this is a swimmable watch, 33 pieces in titanium, 99,500 US dollars. There's a rose gold example in 66 pieces, but this is the one I would go for. Which one would you go for?
So, I have to pick a watch.
Yes, you have to pick a watch among these two.
So this would be the this or that, where if I didn't have to pick a watch, I would opt not to. Neither one of these watches honestly do anything for me. You know, not to be, you know, just to be quite frank, I guess the MB&F mechanically and for what it is speaks a little bit more to what I would spend my money on, but I'm not going to lie to you, I wouldn't put that on my wrist, and I certainly wouldn't spend $100,000 on it. That's just my opinion, you know.
Oh yeah, well, I can be honest with you, there's no reason to spend money on a watch you don't like, so if I give you a this or that, and it's neither, that's also a valid answer. This might be our first neither on a this or that segment. So let's see what the field is saying. Which one do you guys prefer? I see the MB&F. I see a vote for MB&F from AH. I see Watch Yoda with MB&F, choosing that one. Here's a question from Hachi Zenki. He would like to see the HYT Skull instead. Okay, bold, bigger, brasher. How about the Axl Rose edition? There is such a thing, guys. I would say overall, I admire the finish and the artistry of the MB&F more. There we go. We finally got that lume shot with the HYT Ultra. But I don't know, something about
that is pretty in the lume.
It looks cool at night. Okay, so he likes it when the lights are off. You know.
No additional comment there.
They all look better when the lights are off. But the bottom line is that I think I'd actually take the HYT of these two. Even though I admire the MB&F and I admit it's a better finished watch in terms of its horological value, it's higher, there's something about the techiness and the day glow colors of the HYT that really appeals to me. And while there are other nicely finished aquatic watches, there's really nothing else like the hydromechanical display of the HYTs. And I happen to love this particular it's got everything I love. It's got blue and it's got day glow green. I'm happy, and I'll save some money at $75,000 versus $99,000 for the MB&F. All right. And I have a comment here, at 49 millimeters, give me a break. You know what? I've worn the H1. It fits like a hockey puck on your wrist, but it's nice and light.
And I gotta say, in this variation, if you're a Ninja Turtles fan, green and blue.
Believe it or not, they have even more green versions of this. You can get crazier than this. If you're a Ninja Turtles fan, I would hold out for one of those. All right, moving on, an Instagram update. Guys, we have an Instagram update for you. I am doing the Instagram thing. I am Tim_Mosso on Instagram. You can see all of my latest posts on my page. I do a lot of video. I do shots of my own Jaeger-LeCoultre collection. I even throw in a couple of classic cars every once in a while. And of course, I'm a fan of good design generally, so when I find something neat, I'm going to throw it up there. By the way, guys, that's a Jaeger gauge on a Ferrari 250 Testarossa from 1958. I got a little bit of everything. Follow me, Tim_Mosso on Instagram. And I do interact, lots of chatting. If you post a comment on one of my photos, I guarantee you a response. That's my only social medium where I can guarantee you a response every time. Okay, Jason, moving on, we have a question from a friend of my family who forwarded a rare contact from outside my world of watches. It's almost like the worlds collide theory from Seinfeld. It felt weird to have people from New York who are members of my family forwarding watch questions for Monday Mailbag. Let me know. Is the Omega Grey Side of the Moon Porsche Club of America 99-piece limited edition a secure investment? That's how the question was phrased to me. Is it a secure investment?
So, no. No watch is a secured investment. You know, it might sound weird coming from me, a buyer or trader, but that's a tough piece. Really, watches are meant to be worn and enjoyed, and you collect them and you wear them and you love them. Investment's kind of a tough aspect for that. So you can buy watches at retail in limited editions. I understand this is 99 pieces. Yeah. So it's really not a solid investment prospect. It might go up, and you know, there's a lot of things that might happen, but I wouldn't say it's solid. I wouldn't look to put money in a watch guaranteeing anything. If you like the watch and you want to pay a tad over, you know, what a regular one goes for, I guess that makes sense for this piece if you like the yellow accents. Personally, I mean, with what gray sides and dark sides are going for on a secondary market, you can get a really nice watch for a lot less than this pre-owned. So I would say not an investment.
Okay. And that was the answer I gave them. This is actually not much of a price premium. First of all, this series is available only through the Porsche Club of America. 99 pieces. It's intended for owners. There are some interesting signature colors and details that set this one apart, but it's still the basic Grey Side of the Moon. That's a $12,000 watch. This is a $12,910 watch. There you can see the standard Grey Side of the Moon. It's been with us since 2014. Many available pre-owned. That would be the one to buy if you just wanted the basic watch. If you want it for its Porsche-ness, wait 8 months until they're available pre-owned. And remember, there are now many different Porsche watches floating out there. Let's just quickly remember that, I think, Jason, would you agree with me that actually doing an auto branding like Blancpain did with the Lamborghini, the L Evolution Lamborghinis, like Panerai did with the Ferraris, like Breitling has done with Bentleys, it actually shrinks the potential field of buyers. Like you wind up with a smaller market, not a bigger one.
Yeah, 100%. I would agree. It's definitely, it's like any limited edition that has, you know, a wide marking on the dial or anything that's very specific. You know, so I tell clients all the time, like if you're looking at the pink car, obviously it's not going to have as wide a market as the black. So anything that's a standard market, you know, this is one of the reasons why Rolex does so well. Anything that's, you know, like Speedies and Seamasters, standard blacks and blues are going to do better than limited edition Schumachers with red and orange, because you're appealing to less of a market on a secondary when you go to sell the watch. It's a much harder turn. So I actually do like this Porsche version of the Grey Side. I just feel like there's so many different sides of the moon. How many sides of the moon could there be?
Well, quickly, there's the dark side of the moon, there's the gray side of the moon, there's the gray side of the moon with meteorite dial and sediment gold, there's the pitch black, the vintage black, the black, there's the white side of the moon, there are special editions.
There's the new blue one, the new blue side, blue ceramic.
Is there there is a new blue Omega side of the, okay, there's a blue side of the moon, apparently.
At this point, I think we should be calling it the fraction of the moon?
I would say this. If the moon is going to hit your eye like a pizza pie, it's cut about 16 ways at this point. But yeah, I mean, if you got a picture of that blue side of the moon, call that up.
Someone actually Instagrammed it to me. You know what?
Make sure
I might have spoken prematurely. Maybe it doesn't actually exist and it was a cool Photoshop thing. But if it didn't exist, that's one that I would Although I will say, and I've mentioned before, it's not a real Speedmaster unless it's 42 millimeters in manual. So we're just talking about a bunch of fake Seamasters at this point.
Yeah, the Speedmaster Blue Side of the Moon might be like the Pelagos GMT. Someone's like, Tim, have you seen the new Pelagos GMT? I'm like, no, I've never heard of that. Then he sent me a photo.
Awesome.
He sent me a photo during the show. I'm like, oh wow, how did I miss this? Turned out it was a Photoshop on Rolex forums. You got to watch out, guys. Not every watch is authentic. Sometimes it's imaginary. That's the real risk.
If it doesn't exist now, and Omega sees this, it'll exist next month.
Yeah, Omega. There you go. Watchbox Studios Commemorative Edition Blue Side of the Moon. Take that, Hodinkey. All right. So this is the other thing. There are a lot of Porsche-themed watches out there. If you think you're going to collect this watch because it's Porsche-themed, remember, there's Chopard's own Porsche Club of America limited edition from 2015. There's the serially produced Chopard Porsche watch series. There's Porsche designed by Eterna, which was on the scene for over a decade. And of course, then there are the genuinely collectible IWC Porsche design watches like that 3500 right there. So you're lost in a mass of the moon Speedmasters and Porsche watches. In other words, I think we have to acknowledge, other than my favorite, which is undoubtedly going to be a collectible, none of the moons are particularly collectible or will be. Now, yeah, guys, that is my favorite of the series. It's also the rarest. Okay, so moving on from the weirdness, here's my note on JLC questions, guys. I could write the Jaeger LeCoultre corporate FAQ at this point, the FAQ, frequently asked questions. I get so many questions, I can only channel one JLC topic per show. So tonight, I'm going to mention it in passing in reference to an answer to our user, Kunal S. First, comment below the video if you've got comments. I want to see them. I always try to respond. And subscribe if you like what you're seeing here. New shows almost every day. Tons of content, all original and interactive whenever we're live. So Kunal S. asks, Tim, I'm a fan of Rolex. A no-date sub at this point represents the limit of my means, so that's about $7,500 US. But here's the thing, he sees a lot of Rolex bashing on forums, and it wouldn't bother him except for the fact that one of the criticisms seems to ring true to him, and that's that Rolex isn't high horology, but a mass-produced, mostly machine-manufactured watch. He asks, what is high horology and where does that leave Rolex? Well, this is my feeling. First, here's what I think high horology is. It's not a brand, it's not a specific trait of a watch other than one thread that binds, which is manual labor being invested in the watch. It could be a rare art, it could be mechanical tinkering like adjustments by hand, it could be hand assembly, tuning, and finishing. But here's what I say, mom and pop bespoke, Lang & Heine. This is a small company that is out in Dresden, and they're making 60 to 80 watches a year. That's their Georg-shaped watch that just came out. So they make everything from the screws, to the balance, to the hairspring, to the enamel dial. They make every little part that goes into the watch except for the pivot stones. That's definitely high horology. That's a lot of mechanical manual labor. That's a lot of finishing manual labor. And when they do their own engraving, when they create their own mammoth ivory bridges and plates, yes, they do that. That's all manual labor too. High horology without second guessing. Now, here's the thing. Large brands that bring in specialist artisans to create unique editions, think the Lange Handwerkskunst versions, or the Jaeger LeCoultre JLC Duomet UTT Métier Rare, the échappé chiseled dial on the Duomet Unique Travel Time. That takes hours to create by hand with basically white metal that starts as brass and is then covered with rhodium, all executed with a chisel and a hammer, so no two are exactly the same. That's definitely high horology because you can't mass produce that. No two are alike. It's always going to be the guy with the chisel doing it at his own pace, just as it would have been done 100, 200 years ago. Now here's another thing. Mass-produced calibers or parts that are then hand-finished. Sticking with that JLC UTT, let's go to its caliber 383. Dual wing movement, 2 movements, 2 drivetrains, 1 escapement. Now what you have here is a series of parts that originally came out of machines. Most of them were CNC'd, and then they're hand finished, with more time put into hand finishing them than the machine put into making them. That's also high horology. Again, there's no shortcut to doing this. It's as fast as the artist can work. Finally, consider something like a Lange caliber LO434 in a Zeitwerk, also beautifully finished. That's actually the version that's in the Handwerkskunst version of the Zeitwerk. Your final option, and this is where I really think you need to compare a hand-adjusted movement that's, for instance, adjusted using Edicron, or a quick adjustment mechanism like Microvar from Girard-Perregaux, with the excruciating process that you'll see in a Patek Philippe caliber 240 QP. The QP, the Quantième Perpétuel, is adjusted in positions, and then a combination of levers and wheels are adjusted by hand, using eccentric screws if possible, but also including hand filing of the levers themselves, so that the combination of wheels and levers that actuates the perpetual mechanism will function correctly. You get those raw parts, and then not only are they hand finished to be beautiful, they're hand finished to be functional. That's a very slow and excruciating process, and sometimes it has to be re-executed during a service. That is high horology. I will throw out one shout out to Omega, because I often ding them for being mostly machine-made watches. If you have a machine-made watch that serves as a picture frame for something hand-executed, and the greatest example would be this year's limited edition Aquaterra World Timer, you have a machine-made watch with a hand-painted Grand Faux enamel dial. That is now high horology, because it took more time to make that dial center than it took to make the watch. And again, there's no shortcut to remaking that dial if it's damaged. Has to be done by hand, has to be fired in steps. So that's what high horology is. I'm not ready to throw Rolex under the bus, though, because Rolex is clearly distinct from the average watch made in mainland China, which costs $4 US. Rolex is clearly distinct from a Swatch System 51 or a Blue Rebel. So where do we put Rolex, considering they cost thousands to tens of thousands of dollars? Well, we need to call them luxury horology. They're not high horology. There's not enough manual labor, art, or science in there to call that a handmade watch, but there's no doubt that the quality of what you're getting, which is a trans-generational product, which can be serviced for 300 years and always brought back to spec, always brought back to function, that's a luxury product, what you're paying for and what you're getting. So let's call that luxury horology, and that goes for Omega, that goes for Breitling, that goes for Baume & Mercier. Any trans-generational luxury watch product, when you're paying luxury dollars and you're getting something that can be serviced till the end of time by a watchmaker, that's my definition of luxury horology, and that's why Rolex is still something special, even if it doesn't quite make the handmade cut. Is that a decent standard?
Yeah, I would. I mean, here's one thing. I would say nobody's under the impression that Rolex is even going out of their way to make themselves seem this way. For me, you need to own one Rolex, okay? And for me, and my money speaks, you know, the non-date ceramic sub was it for me. Not necessarily looking to go buy other Rolexes, might happen. I don't know. I think if you really can't be a watch guy unless you experience owning one in a collection. That being said, the watch is liquid. For a very, very, very long time, you will be able to sell that watch very easily. So that also appeals to a lot of people. You know, you can go spend, a lot of money, this or that. There's two watches that were $100,000. I would take my no-date sub and keep my 100 grand in the bank every day of the week. And that appeals to a lot of people. So if high horology is one thing, but if we're talking about, you know, a watch that sits on the wrist really well, is everyday wearable, and you can spend money and get money back out of it and basically enjoy it for a long time for not much of a depreciation, that has to be taken into account. And I think more often than not, the guys in the chat, the guys that I talk to on a daily basis, that's where they're at. They're at that 10 to 20. They want to find a watch, you know. So high horology is one thing. It's awesome to look at. For me, probably will never own one just because I couldn't justify spending the money on it. But, I mean, it's definitely cool to talk about and debate. I would strongly advise you never let anybody tell you what you should and should not buy. If you love the watch, if I loved that watch, I would never let someone on a forum talk me out of buying it and wearing it. So
that's a fact. You
got to wear it for yourself, not for other people.
Yeah, and that goes for me, him. Don't trust the guy who tells you to go against your instincts if you love something, because this is an emotional hobby. We don't need any of these watches. We want them. So if you want it enough and your means are sufficient, go for it. Luxury lasts, and Rolex is a luxury watch. All right, so we have a lot of interesting questions coming through tonight, and I have a question from Dylan Abel who's asking, does Seiko fit Tim's definition of a luxury watch? Well, certainly Grand Seiko does, Crador certainly does, and I'll be honest, there are some Seiko mechanical watches like the SLA 17, that's the 62 MAS tribute, that has a Grand Seiko movement. And that would be a watch that you could buy it for under $2,000 pre-owned. That would be a luxury product. First of all, $1,700, $1,900, still a lot to spend on a product that tells you time with a mechanical movement. That's obsolete, that's an emotional purchase, and it's a luxury product because I have no doubt that Seiko will service that and make it whole and look new and run new till the end of time. Now, I think the threshold of luxury, like, now how do you distinguish, like, just some watch from luxury? For me, it's not about price, it's about two things. Is there a secondary market such that someone will buy it from you and then that person will be able to sell it again to someone else? A secondary market is one hallmark of luxury. Luxury lasts. The other thing is, can it be continuously serviced and brought back to spec over time? You know, you look at something like an Apple Watch Edition, which was the crazy full gold bracelet Apple Watch that I think in theory you could spend $17,000 buying for that first generation in 2015. That's a disposable product. So there you see, price does not define it as, it's frivolous. It's not luxury, it's frivolity. And if that gives you your jollies and you like it, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, but that's not a luxury watch. That will depreciate to its melt value, whereas a true luxury watch will always have a secondary market and it will always be serviceable such that you can bring it back. And that goes for stuff like Breitling Super Quartz. I see Breitling Super Quartz watches that are 15 years old that are still coming in for service and working fine. I see Breitling Aerospace high-end quartz from the 80s, the first generation, that's still serviceable. So don't discount a watch just because it's electronic. Discount something as not being luxury if it's more frivolous than enduring. And that's pretty much the standard. That's where I draw the line. Okay, moving on through the questions. Jason, do me a favor, watch the chat box and grab the questions as they come along, because it's tough for me to kind of guide the crew along with the graphics and pull from the chat box. Okay, so here's a question that came out from one of our this is one of our more interesting viewers, I think. We have a question from Flip to Blues. He wants to know, should he go all in for a, looks like he's asking if you should go for a 16600 blue dial 369, or should he go for a Rolex Explorer 1? So I think he's asking, should he go for an Oyster Perpetual, is it an Oyster Perpetual blue dial that he's speccing right there?
Yeah, I believe so, 39.
Yeah, or a Explorer 136. I mean, how do you distinguish between an Oyster Perpetual and
honestly, I mean, they're
an Explorer?
You know, I'd probably get some hate for this, but they're kind of the same watch. I don't know. I guess it depends. I like the Oyster Perpetual if it's me. Blue dial's cool. I think the rhodium has the market's kind of spoke that the rhodium's the hottest piece in that watch. Explorers are forever though. I guess Explorer ones are cool. I like the loomed 963 over the previous version, even though the non-loom's a little cheaper. But
I'm going to say this. Blue is an of-the-moment thing. If you're looking for a Rock of Gibraltar, if you want like the old-timer, if you want the Rolex icon, you could easily argue that the Explorer has been that for just as long as the Submariner has. That said, guys who really know their history are going to look at the Oyster Perpetual, and they know what that watch is all about. That was arguably, I mean, that was the first water-resistant. That was basically the successor to the Bubbleback. You go back to the Bubbleback of 1931-32, that was the Oyster case with the perpetual automatic winding system. That was really the first Oyster Perpetual. That's an unbroken lineage. And for me, if you have that all-timer watch with the modern blue dial, you can allow yourself a little bit of a silly indulgence. I don't think blue will ever be out of style. I don't know if it'll be the craze that it is now. I do think that a Explorer 1 black dial, you know, it's always, especially in 36 millimeters, it's always going to be one of the iconic Rolex watches up there with the Sub and the Daytona. But I think the Oyster Perpetual is core collection. You're not out at the periphery. It's not like we're talking about Cellini prints or something that's a little bit wacky like an Explorer 242 that maybe isn't going to be a forever type watch. I would say go with the blue dial, go with the Oyster Perpetual, and again, in a few years, like Jason said, that's a liquid watch. That's a watch that's going to hold its value. Buy it pre-owned, and you can trade it for almost what you paid for it in a few years. If you prefer the Explorer, you can always revert and swap. That's the nice thing about comparing two very similar Rolex watches. Okay, so here's an interesting question from Eric Nielsen, who's asking, Tim, can you speak on what makes up the delay between full retail limited editions and the sudden drop of buckets on used gray? So, okay, so he's asking, why do we not see a whole lot of Omega Speedy Tuesdays right now? I guess there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, but why aren't we seeing them?
I think the market's kind of let out on Speedy Tuesdays a little bit. Guys who got on them when they first came out, flipped them, or kept them. Guys that wanted one and couldn't get one have already gotten them and are keeping them. You see a couple on the market. I think, you know, we get a couple calls a week. There's a lot of guys that think the watch is worth a little bit more than we do. So that usually ends in a conversation where we don't purchase the watch. You know, it's a cool watch. There's just so many Speedmaster limited editions. It's really tough to justify paying over retail for something at this point, unless it's like a true vintage Speedy first Speedy. But it's a tough market on Speedies.
It's very challenging because we talk about what was the best Speedmaster limited edition of the year. Like, we don't talk about what are the best Speedy limited editions. We're like, of the Speedmaster limited editions that came out just this year, which one's the best? Okay, when you're talking about that kind of volume of special series, there are very few that stand out. The Silver Snoopy 1, the Silver Snoopy 2, those, you know, the Apollo Soyuz watches, over time, a few do rise to the top and they stand out. I don't think the Speedy Tuesday is going to be that in the long run. I think enough of them were made that the market will be sated, and when people look back at this year, they're probably going to look back at the anniversary CK2915 tribute as the truly collectible watch, especially when it's paired with the other two pieces of the trilogy with matching serial numbers. So that would be what I say. I would also say, at what point does the full retail limited edition drop off? Like Jason said, when everyone who is a buyer has one, a buyer to keep, when they have them and speculators start flipping the rest, once you see real inventory listed on Chrono24, that's generally the end of things. Like, you stopped seeing a premium for the Rolex Deep Sea Deep Blue once real photos of inventory started showing up on Chrono24. Once the sellers have to buy them and hold them, it means they don't already have an end user in mind when they purchase the inventory. It means they're buying and trying to find a buyer. That's at the point when you start to see the gray market and you start to see the pre-owned and the discounting. So, question from David Lemieux, who's asking, is Grand Seiko high horology? There is some hand labor in their watches. What do you think, Jason, in general?
You know, if we're going to go ahead and apply the definition you gave earlier in the show, which I bet you couldn't say twice in a row, but I might be wrong. It was impressive. I like Grand Seiko quite a bit. It's, you know, no secret that I like all Seiko. I like regular Seikos too. Grand Seiko, I would say, is not high horology. It is kind of a hybrid. I find their movements to be beautiful. I think their prices are rather reasonable. Some of the dials, like you know, the snow dials and stuff like that, you could argue there's a lot of labor in there. I think I guess it depends on what you if you like Tim's definition or how you apply your thoughts. But I like Grand Seiko quite a bit. I would say buy one.
I would say there's definitely hand finishing in the case. The dials are exquisitely made, many of them with a lot of hand labor. I would say this, there's definitely more hand labor invested in making a Grand Seiko than there is in making a Rolex. I'm not sure it nudges over the threshold of being a largely hand-built watch versus a largely automated build process. But I will say this, a Grand Seiko caliber is built by a watchmaker regulated by a watchmaker. The case, especially the more highly finished Zaratsu optically smooth polish, that is done by hand, and it's a unique process. The dials, which are probably the best part of a Grand Seiko watch, are extensively handmade. I would say you could easily dig in, stake your claim, and defend the position that Grand Seiko, especially some of the more handmade dials and hand-finished cases, qualify as high horology. It would be harder to make the case for some modern Rolex and Omega watches just because they are so mechanically, millimetrically, repeatably perfect by virtue of an automated process. That said, once you start talking about Crador or certain Grand Seiko models like the new $50,000 8-day spring drive, that's made by the Micro Artist Studio. Anything made by the Seiko Micro Artist Studio is high horology without reservation. Okay, here's a great question from Wing Yip asking, what qualifies as an independent brand? Jason, is there like a you must be this tall to ride type threshold, or is it purely subjective?
No, so I think, you know, his question's pretty good. It also goes to micro manufacturers,
okay,
which, you know, is an independent brand. So you make a brand, right? You sell the watch, your brand, you have your own name on it, and you don't owe anybody anything, then you're an independent brand. So a lot of these bigger company independent brands are obviously not part of Swatch Group or Richemont.
That's correct.
Or so that's kind of where we define independent. But yeah, I think a lot of these micro brands that are making, you know, runs of 100 or 200 watches could be considered, I mean, they are independent.
So there's the easy answer to this, and then there's the more in the weeds. The easy answer is when people talk about luxury groups, they're generally talking about a handful of companies. They're talking about Rolex, which is an empire unto itself, despite having only two brands, Tudor and Rolex. You know, that's a $7 to $8 billion a year US dollar company. Then they talk about the Swatch Group, which is even bigger than Rolex. They own 18 watch brands, depending on what you qualify as a watch brand. They own 18. Then there's the Richemont Group, which got its start as a tobacco purveyor, purchased Cartier and purchased all the branches of Cartier, London, New York, and Paris during the 70s, combined them during the 80s, bought Piaget during that period, sold off the tobacco interests during the 2000s, created the Vendôme luxury group in the 90s. That's why you hear pre and post Vendôme Panerai. That's where that notion came from. Vendôme was mostly Cartier. There was a big shift in the 2000s, and the tobacco interests were sold off. What had once been the South African-based Rothmans company became the Swiss-based Richemont. Today, they're a luxury group that does own things like Dunhill, J. Purdy rifles, but they're mostly jewelry and watches. They own, I want to say, somewhere between 12 and 14 watch brands, depending on what you count as a watch brand. For instance, they own a half interest in Ralph Lauren polo watches. Okay, then there is LVMH, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, which is part of the world's biggest luxury group. Depending on how you count it, it is, you know, a $35 to $50 billion company, whether you count LVMH by itself or the even bigger luxury holding group that owns it. They're French-owned. They own principally Hublot, they own Tag Heuer, they own Zenith, and then they also own Bulgari, which is a very accomplished watch brand, but operates independently within the group. And then finally, there's a company called PPR. They became Kering, and they own Jean Richard, they own Ulysse Nardin, and they own Gerard Perregaux. Anything outside that monolith is generally considered to be independent, with the exception of Seiko, which is seen as sort of a Japanese Rolex. That is, they're so big that they can't really be considered independent, and they're owned by Seiko Epson, which makes everything from office equipment to scanning equipment to components and microelectronics for, you know, institutional users and manufacturers. So anything outside that sphere would be an independent. Now, I'll say this. Is Patek Philippe independent? They're a billion-dollar company. Audemars Piguet, too. I'm not sure, but they're independent from those groups. Generally, outside those groups or monoliths that I mentioned, you can qualify something as independent. Although people are going to say Rolex is owned by a nonprofit foundation, that muddies the waters. But in general, I would say outside the mega, multi-billion-dollar watch brands or groups, independent. Okay, so what are our thoughts on Cuervo y Sobrinos as a brand? This is John H.'s question. We don't see them too often. What do you think?
We don't see them too often because we don't actively look to purchase them. That being said, I'll take one in a trade. We do get pitched quite a few of them. They're hard to really move on a secondary market because it's a very unique type of watch and it's kind of an odd market. It takes a long time for us to sell, which doesn't necessarily fit our business plan that well. They also are very expensive to ship because they come with those giant boxes, humidor boxes, which are really cool until you need to ship one. I like the watch. I mean, they have some cool kind of offbeat complications for pretty good prices, although I see a lot of these selling more like on eBay or direct to user for, you know, sub 2,000 or right around $2,500 range, depending on the complication, but we don't get too many.
I would say there are maybe three challenging aspects of Cuervo y Sobrinos. The first is that it's kind of a revived brand. You know, obviously, if we're talking about the first half of the 20th century and a company literally based out of a jeweler in Havana, that's one thing, but it hasn't been that for decades, so it was reestablished in Switzerland. You're getting a legitimate Swiss watch. It's a luxury product by my previous definition. That said, they tend to create a lot of polarizing designs, and that's the second challenge. You either love them or you hate them, which can make things difficult when you look to resell. And then finally, I would say that mechanically, they're mostly customer calibers and customer complications, which means that they're well made, they're Swiss, they're quality, they're serviceable, they're luxury, but they're not distinctive or unique mechanically, which for a lot of guys who are, you know, movement nerds is going to be a turnoff. So between being a revived brand with very little real history, mechanically generic and polarizing designs, you have to really love the watch and the look of the watch and the look and feel of the watch on your wrist to get into Cuervo y Sobrinos, but I'm not going to impugn the quality of what they're selling. It's good. Okay, so now moving on to some of our last questions. Things get a bit technical, guys. We have a question from JS who is asking, Tim, I have a question. You don't say. On some fora on the internet, I see the Valjoux/ETA 7750 chronograph lift angle listed as 49 degrees, and on others I see it listed as 52. I thought the ETA 7750 is identical to the Valjoux 7750 and all current come from ETA. So is the lift angle 49 or 52? Okay, quick. Let's talk about what lift angle is for our viewers who are not, you know, reading service documents at 11 o'clock at night like I am. Okay, so it's the radial angle through which the impulse jewel on the roller table, which is connected to the balance wheel, comes into contact with the fork of the anchor. So basically, the contact of the fork with that impulse jewel as it's moving the roller table to sway the balance, the degree out of 360 during which those two parts, the fork and the jewel, are in contact is called the lift angle. There you can see where the lift angle takes place and how the arc is measured. You can see what part is actually impulsing the balance. Now, in general, really old pocket watches would try to reduce friction by having a really low lift angle. Think 44, 45, 46. Today, on more modern movements, manufacturing tolerances are better. It tends to be 50, 51, 52. Okay, so now the beat rate and running rate, time lost or gained, can be measured on a timing machine by a watchmaker without the lift angle. You can measure whether the watch is gaining or losing time without the lift angle. But to know the amplitude of the balance, which is the #1 quality that Mike Michaels and our team look for when they try to assess the health and running condition of a watch, you can see how lift angle is entered at the bottom of the screen in the timing machine. Once it has that, it can compute amplitude from the sound it's reading from the movement. Okay, so to measure amplitude, you need lift angle. So here's what you do. You manually enter lift angle, and to find out the lift angle, you look at a service document. There's a way to visually do it if you can see the balance, but for the most part, you look at service documents. So on ETA's customer service portal, I looked up their service document for the current version of the ETA Valjoux 7750. And lo and behold, there it is right there. You can get it in many languages. And it has a lift angle of 49 degrees. So per ETA, the lift angle of the current 7750 is 49 degrees. There it is in the column underneath the picture of the watch. It's the last 4 down, 49 degrees. That is not to say all versions are, but current spec is 49, and that's what ETA suggests you use on your timing machine. Okay, so now there's a guy, Fluffy Kitten, who's asking...
I want to go on the record and say I agree with everything you just said.
Everything I just said?
Everything you just said was right.
Cool. There you go.
what he said.
I didn't expect a pat on the back there. Okay, so yeah, Fluffy Kitten, there are questions that come in live and questions that I've prepared. Sometimes when I answer a live question, I don't have a picture because I haven't prepared it. When I answer a question someone sent in an email or asked in a comment thread, I can load a photo ahead of time and my team can bring it up. Okay, so finally question, what about vintage Tudor Advisors? Ryan M asks, he's thinking of making an alarm watch his next purchase, and he's flirting with a vintage Tudor Advisor as his choice. Any chance for a brief history of the model line? What should I look for? And does £3,500 British pounds sound like a reasonable price to pay? Is it too much or is it right? Okay, so here's the thing. The Tudor Advisor came out in 1957. The first reference was the 7926. It was a small watch, manually wound with a Schild, I want to say 1475 caliber. It was 34 millimeters. It featured an oyster case from Rolex, 34 mil manual wind, Schild caliber. You can find these. They were made from 1957 to about 1968. You should be able to find them for $2,500 US dollars. So if you're paying 3,500 British pounds, it better be a time capsule with a full box and paper set and the original bill of sale. Something is off there if you're paying 3,500 pounds. Okay. There was also a thinner version of this called the 1537, same caliber. Okay, changes in 1968. Now you get the reference 10050. Different Schild caliber, 3745 in there, still manual wind. What sets this one apart is, for the most part, you're going to have baton hands that are a little easier to read, and you're going to have like quasi-Carrera style long faceted lugs. They've got a nice sharp crease line. So if you're buying one of these, they were made from 1968 to 1977, make sure that the lugs are full, that that crease line is intact, that it has great definition. You're still looking at a 34 millimeter watch. More of these were sold with a bracelet though, so you should be able to find one of these with a bracelet, and you should still be able to find it for $3,500 US dollars or less. If you find one of the 1950s or 60s references, sometimes you can find those with a really cool Rolex riveted bracelet, in which case, if that's intact and original to the watch, I would say absolutely consider paying 3,500 British pounds, but that's the only case. Time capsule watch with all papers and box, 3,500 British pounds. Immaculate condition and a rivet bracelet, 3,500 British pounds. Otherwise, for any vintage Tudor from 57, Tudor Advisor, from 57 to 77 when they made them, don't pay more than 3,500 US dollars. And remember, it is a very small watch, guys. So try before you buy. You might not like the way a vintage Tudor Advisor looks on your wrist. Okay, so guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I want to thank everyone who participated in the live chat. Please comment in the thread below. I do my best to answer all of the comments in our comment boxes after the show. Jason, thanks for joining us tonight.
Always good.
How can our friends reach out and contact you if they want to buy or sell a watch?
Text me, call me, 954-261-4712. It's my cell phone. If you get a voicemail, text me.
Area K asking, what's my opinion on the Omega Memomatic? I think it's one of the most underrated watches available in the vintage segment. Buy them now while they're still cheap. That and the Chronostop. I think those are peas in a pod. Great opportunity to get two great vintage Omegas that are certified collectibles, serviceable forever. Get them both for under $2,000 combined. And I'm also doing Instagram. Remember, I'm Tim_Mosso on Instagram. Follow me, see my escapades. I love doing video on Instagram too, so I try to give you guys more, and I always respond to comments made in the individual photos on Instagram. Guys, thank you so much for joining. I'm Tim, he's Jason, they're the crew. This is Watchbox, and thanks for logging on.